The night was unnervingly still when I opened the heavy door of Julian's old SUV. The smell of gasoline and faint traces of his cologne still lingered in the stale air, mixed with the dryness of leather seats that had aged alongside our marriage. For me, getting into his car was nothing unusual. I often collected the clutter he left behind. Crumpled receipts, forgotten water bottles, spare change rattling in the cup holder. It was a ritual of habit, an echo of the way I had quietly cleaned up after him for 40 years. But that night was different. My fingers brushed against the edge of the glove compartment, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I opened it. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the restless unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Inside, beneath a stack of old registration papers and faded napkins, I felt something slick and foreign. I pulled it out slowly, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. It was a tube. Small, discreet, the label slightly smudged from use but unmistakable. Personal lubricant. My breath caught, sharp and shallow, as if the air had suddenly betrayed me. The world around me blurred, the edges of the car dissolving into a haze. We hadn't been intimate in years. Julian had always brushed me off with excuses. He was tired. Age had dulled his desire. The stress of work weighed too heavily. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But this was undeniable. I stared at the tube in my hand, my pulse echoing in my ears like a drum of war. 40 years of marriage unraveled in that single instant. Every tender moment, every family celebration, every whispered promise in the dark, all began to feel like fragile glass, shattering into 1,000 shards at my feet. I could have thrown it away. I could have confronted him, demanded answers through tears and rage, but instead, something colder, sharper awakened inside me. A thought so sudden and so clear, it almost frightened me. I didn't discard the tube. I didn't scream. I acted. With hands steadier than I expected, I carried it into the house and retrieved a tube of industrial superglue from the drawer where I kept old tools, the kind of glue I once used to mend a broken chair leg at the bakery. Drop by drop, I filled the lubricant tube until it was heavy, viscous, lethal in its deception. I wiped the nozzle carefully, sealed it shut, and gave it a gentle shake. It looked exactly the same. No one would ever notice. When I slipped it back into the glove compartment, tucking it neatly among the papers, it felt like I was sealing a pact not with Julian, not with Allison, though I didn't yet know her part in this story, but with myself. A vow that I would not be silent, that I would not remain the blind, docile wife any longer. The car stood in silence, its headlights reflecting faintly against the garage wall. I closed the door softly and leaned against the cool metal, my heart hammering in my chest. A part of me trembled with fear, but another part, one I had never truly known, stood firm. I whispered into the quiet garage, words meant only for me. This isn't over. That single act, quiet and deliberate, would become the spark that set everything ablaze. By the time the sun had set again, my neighbors would be dialing the fire department in panic, and the truth of my life, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation would no longer remain hidden in the shadows of Julian's car. I sat at the kitchen table, the wooden surface worn smooth from years of family meals and late-night cups of coffee. The silence in the house was oppressive, thick as the fog that rolls in at dawn, the kind of silence that doesn't simply fill the air but presses down on your chest until breathing feels like a conscious act. It was no longer a peaceful quiet. It had become an unwelcome tenant in our home, constant and heavy. Above me, the old wall clock ticked with mechanical persistence. Its brass pendulum swung with a rhythm that seemed almost accusatory. That clock had been a wedding gift from my late mother, a symbol of time, of endurance, of promises meant to last. Now, each sharp tick felt like a reminder that time had betrayed me, that every passing second was cutting deeper into the fragile fabric of my life. Julian had just returned from one of his endless business dinners. He walked through the front door not like a man coming home, but like someone trying to escape a world only he knew. His face carried the weight of exhaustion, but beneath that mask was something else, something I had begun to recognize: guilt. His eyes, once lively, now seemed veiled, darting away when they met mine, as though afraid of what I might see. He tossed his jacket onto the sofa with a carelessness that felt staged, as though even his fatigue was part of an act. Loosening his tie with exaggerated motions, he sighed deeply, the way a man might if he carried the burdens of the world. Yet, instead of admiration, I felt only suspicion twist within me. Without so much as a word, he stumbled toward the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress groaned beneath his weight, the familiar creak that once signaled safety now mocking me with its routine. His cologne lingered in the air, expensive and familiar, but tonight it was tainted. Another scent clung to him, faint but undeniable, a sweet floral perfume, intrusive and foreign. It wasn't mine. I froze where I stood, the air seeming to thicken in my lungs. That perfume was like a confession whispered in the dark, more brazen than words, more cruel than any spoken lie. It wrapped around me, forcing me to confront the possibility I had long feared but never dared to name. Minutes later, the soft rhythm of his snoring filled the house. Once, that sound had lulled me to sleep, the steady assurance of a man at peace. But tonight, it felt like a lullaby for a fool, a cruel melody mocking the wife who had trusted him for 4 decades. I rose quietly, each step practiced and careful, the grace of a woman who had spent years living in service to silence. I moved about the living room, tidying the remnants of his arrival, his wallet left half open, his phone glowing faintly on the armrest, his old laptop balanced precariously. The glow from his phone drew my eyes. Julian had always avoided technology, dismissing email as too complicated. Yet now, here it was, an unread message lighting up the screen like a sinister beacon. Against my better judgment, against the voice in my head begging me to stop, I reached for it. My thumb hovered, trembling, then pressed, and with that single act, the walls of my world began to crack. The screen glowed in my hand, a pale light that seemed almost alive in the darkened room. My pulse raced so violently that I thought I might drop the phone. Julian never touched email. He had said it 100 times with that easy, dismissive smile. "Juliet, I'll never understand all this technology nonsense. I'd rather just pick up the phone." And yet, here it was. A new message waiting, daring me to open it. It felt like standing at the threshold of a door I knew would lead to darkness, but once curiosity grips you, it is merciless. I tapped the screen. The email was short, just a handful of words, but each one was a dagger. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and trembling. My eyes scanned the words again, desperate for some other meaning, some innocent explanation. But there was none. That little red heart on the screen pulsed like a cruel echo of affection, mocking, intimate, undeniable. "Dad." The word reverberated through my skull, splitting me open. Who was calling him that? And with such intimacy? My son Daniel? No, Daniel would never write something like this. This wasn't the voice of a child reaching out to his father. It was different, personal, forbidden. I scrolled quickly, my thumb trembling so hard it almost slipped. The sender's address was strange, an incoherent string of letters and numbers. No name, no clear identity, just a jumble of characters, as though someone had taken great care to remain hidden. The more I stared at the screen, the more I felt the ground beneath me give way. My breathing grew shallow, ragged, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, dizzy from the height. I looked toward the bedroom. Through the crack in the door, I could see Julian's silhouette turned on his side, his mouth slightly open, snoring softly. His face looked calm, peaceful even, as though nothing in the world could disturb him. The cruel contrast between his tranquility and the storm raging inside me nearly drove me to scream. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, my fingers clumsy and weak. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped it onto the hardwood floor. I turned away quickly, clutching my chest as if to hold myself together. The clock ticked louder, every second echoing the words from the screen. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." I wanted to dismiss it as a mistake, as something misunderstood. But the truth was gnawing at me already. My heart knew, even if my mind resisted. There was another life my husband was living, one I had been blind to, one he had carefully hidden from me. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for deceit. The floral perfume still clung to the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee grounds and stale bread, turning my stomach. I pressed my hands to my temples, forcing myself to stay composed. But no matter how I tried, those words would not leave me. They circled my mind like vultures, patient and merciless, waiting for my heart to surrender. I forced myself to continue tidying, trying to anchor my shaking hands in the rhythm of chores. Pick up the jacket, fold it, place the wallet neatly on the table, breathe. But each movement felt mechanical, hollow, as though my body were a puppet detached from my soul. When I picked up Julian's trousers to place them in the laundry basket, something stiff pressed against my fingers. I slipped my hand into the pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. My heart lurched when I unfolded it. It was a receipt. The ink was fresh, the paper crisp, dated that very night. The words blurred at first, but when I forced my eyes to focus, the letters stabbed me like needles. San Antonio Steakhouse. I blinked, stunned. San Antonio? Julian had told me he was meeting his partners in Dallas. He'd even sighed earlier in the week about how much he dreaded the long drive up there. But this receipt was proof that Dallas had been a lie. A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and mirthless. Julian hated Dallas, but San Antonio, yes, that city was different. His mother had lived there before she passed, and he often spoke of it with warmth, with nostalgia. San Antonio has my best memories, Juliet. That city always feels like home. But tonight, it wasn't his mother he had gone to remember. The receipt showed dinner for two entrees, filet and pasta, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. My throat tightened when I read it. That wine wasn't just any wine. It was the one he had bought for me on our 10th anniversary, the one we shared under flickering candlelight when he toasted my success at opening my first bakery. I could still see him, proud and smiling, raising the glass as if we were invincible. That memory had been etched into my heart as proof of his love. And now, that very wine had been poured for someone else. My knees weakened. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself as waves of nausea surged through me. It was as though the past had been stolen, rewritten, and handed to another woman. What I thought was ours, our symbol, our intimacy was nothing more than a prop recycled in a theater of deceit. I snapped a photo of the receipt with my phone, my fingers trembling. I couldn't trust my memory alone anymore. I needed evidence, a record, something tangible to fight against the fog of lies Julian had wrapped around me. The kitchen light flickered slightly, and I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked pale, hollow, almost unrecognizable. I barely saw the woman who had stood by her husband for 4 decades. Instead, I saw someone on the edge of collapse, clutching scraps of proof against a storm she could no longer deny. I whispered into the empty kitchen, my voice breaking. "Why, Julian? Why San Antonio? Who were you with?" The only answer was the relentless ticking of the clock, its sound now unbearable. The night pressed heavily around me, the house cloaked in shadows that seemed to breathe with my unease. Sleep was impossible. The receipt, the perfume, the email all circled my thoughts like vultures, refusing to let me rest. I needed more. Proof that what I feared wasn't just paranoia, but reality. So I walked to the garage. The concrete floor was cool beneath my slippers, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline, oil, and something else, something sweeter, that floral perfume. It lingered even here, where it had no place being. My stomach twisted. Julian's SUV stood silent in the dim light, its metal body reflecting my flashlight beam in dull streaks. I opened the driver's side door. The seat was still warm, the impression of his body fresh, as though he had only just left. The intimacy of that warmth, combined with the alien perfume, felt like an intrusion into my life. I searched carefully. At first, there was nothing unusual loose change scattered in the cup holder, an empty water bottle rolling beneath the seat. My breath grew shallow as I leaned further, my fingers brushing along hidden crevices. Then, in the glove compartment, my hand landed on something slick, plastic, and unmistakable. I pulled it out. A tube of personal lubricant, the same one I had seen before, but now I studied it under the harsh white glow of my flashlight. The cap was crusted with residue, sticky and damning. My throat tightened, bile rising as I realized it hadn't just been stashed here, it had been used. I stood frozen, my reflection warped in the SUV's windshield, clutching the vile thing as though it were the embodiment of betrayal itself. Julian and I hadn't been intimate in years. His excuses echoed in my ears. "I'm too tired. Age has taken it out of me. You deserve better than a man like me." Lies, every word of it. Then why this? Why here? My skin crawled, and I quickly shoved it back, placing it exactly where I had found it. I wiped my hands furiously with a napkin from the car, scrubbing until the skin burned, as if I could erase the contamination of his deceit. But I didn't stop. My survival instincts had kicked in, the cold determination of a woman who knew she was being betrayed. I searched more methodically now, moving seat cushions, shining the flashlight into dark corners. And that was when I found them, crumpled napkins stuffed beneath the back seat, stained, fragrant with that same floral perfume, heady and foreign. I lifted one close, and the scent hit me like a slap. It wasn't mine. It was loud, vulgar, brazen, the scent of another woman claiming space in my world. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to photograph everything. The lubricant, the perfumed napkins, each picture a wound, but also a weapon. I needed a record, proof to remind myself that I wasn't imagining this, that my pain had roots in undeniable truth. When I finally closed the SUV, my chest heaved as though I had run a marathon. The garage felt heavier, suffocating, the darkness pressing against me. I leaned against the car, my body shaking, the weight of betrayal crushing down. I whispered into the silence, my voice hoarse. "God help me. What am I supposed to do?" But there was no answer. Only the lingering perfume, clinging stubbornly to the air, taunting me with its presence. I returned to the kitchen, but the house no longer felt like mine. Every corner seemed to echo with whispers I couldn't quite hear, as if the walls themselves knew what Julian had been hiding. I sat at the table again, the cool wood pressing against my trembling palms, and stared at the evidence I had gathered: photos of the receipt, of the napkins, of the damning tube I dared not touch again. The images glowed on my phone, each one like a blade cutting deeper into my chest. My husband's betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was becoming a grotesque tapestry, stitched together piece by piece. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of my heart. It beat like a thief's, guilty and desperate, as if I were the one committing a crime. But I wasn't the liar. I wasn't the traitor. Still, shame wrapped around me, suffocating, whispering that somehow this humiliation belonged to me too. Through the open doorway, I could hear Julian snoring. That sound, once a lullaby that brought me comfort, now grated against my nerves like sandpaper. Every rumble was a reminder of his deceit, of the other life he thought he could live without consequence. He slept peacefully while my world cracked open around me. I tried to busy myself. I gathered laundry, rinsed dishes, wiped counters already clean. But the motions were hollow, my mind elsewhere, circling the same images over and over. That receipt, that perfume, that message. And beneath it all, the same poisonous thought pulsed relentlessly. Who was she? The perfume haunted me most. Sweet, floral, overwhelming. I had worn the same rose fragrance for years. Gentle, subtle, a reflection of the woman I had been. But this scent, it was bold, almost aggressive, as if declaring war. It clung to Julian's clothes, seeped into the leather of his car, even lingered on my hands after I had scrubbed them raw. I could almost taste it, bitter and foreign on my tongue. Sleep refused to come. Instead, memories rose unbidden, cruel in their contrast. I remembered the early years Julian and I laughing together in our cramped San Diego apartment, sharing coffee and dreams. I remembered the pride in his eyes when I opened my first bakery, the way he raised that glass of Cabernet as if to toast forever. And now I knew those memories were tainted, shadows cast over them until they felt like lies. The clock struck midnight, its chime cutting through the silence like a judgment. I jolted, my breath catching, and suddenly the kitchen felt too small, too suffocating. I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass, staring out into the dark street. The neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that inside my house a war had already begun. I whispered to my reflection, my voice barely audible, "Something is going on, and I will find out what it island." It wasn't a promise to Julian. It wasn't even a promise to myself. It was a declaration to the woman who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. The night stretched on, endless and merciless. By the time dawn began to brush faint light across the curtains, I had made a decision. I could no longer survive on suspicion alone. I needed the truth. Hard, undeniable truth. And I knew exactly where to start. The first light of morning crept through the curtains, faint and uncertain, painting thin golden stripes across the kitchen floor. I hadn't slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to surrender. The images of the night, the email, the receipt, the perfume spun in a vicious carousel that left me nauseous and hollow. I placed a cup of black coffee in front of Julian as he shuffled into the kitchen, his hair unkempt, his eyes feigning grogginess. He sipped without looking at me and muttered in that same husky tone he used so often, "Important meeting today. I'll be home late." The lie slid from his lips as effortlessly as breath. My lips curved into a strained smile, but inside I burned. Every word he spoke felt rehearsed, perfected over years of practice. He left with his briefcase, kissed my shoulder lightly, a gesture that now felt more like mockery than affection, and disappeared through the door. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stared at the untouched half of his coffee, the surface trembling slightly as my hands shook. I couldn't keep circling suspicion like a starving animal pacing its cage. I needed facts, proof. Someone who could strip away the veil Julian had woven around me. That was when I remembered her. Mrs. Miller. Years ago, when I first opened the bakery, she had been one of my most loyal customers and a kind friend. Over warm loaves and cups of tea, she had once confided in me about a man she knew, Thomas, a private investigator who specialized in delicate matters, as she had put it. I remembered how her voice dropped when she spoke his name, how she leaned closer, as if afraid someone might overhear. At the time I laughed. "Oh, I'll never need something like that," I had told her. How naive I was. Now, that memory returned with cruel clarity. With trembling fingers, I picked up my phone and scrolled through the faded list of contacts. My heart pounded when her name appeared. For a moment, I hesitated. Pride is a stubborn thing, and mine screamed not to dial. But desperation was louder. The line rang. Once, twice, then her familiar, gentle voice. "Juliet, it's been so long. Is everything all right?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Mrs. Miller, I need your help. Do you still know that investigator you once mentioned?" A pause, heavy, weighted. I imagined her sitting in her sunlit kitchen, frowning, her intuition sharper than most. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. "Juliet, what's going on? Did Julian do something?" My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. "I just need to know the truth, please. Can you connect me to him?" She didn't press further. She didn't have to. A silence stretched for a moment longer, then she answered simply, "I'll send you his number." When I hung up, my phone buzzed almost instantly with a new message. A name, a number, and a single line. "Trust him, he's discreet." I sat at the table, staring at the digits as if they were a lifeline thrown into stormy seas. My fingers hovered before finally pressing call. The voice that answered was calm, professional, steady. "Mrs. Roberts? I was told you might need me. Please don't worry. I can help." And just like that, the wheels of truth began to turn. At noon, I made my way downtown. The city was alive with the usual rhythm of midday cars honking, people rushing with takeaway lunches in their hands, shop doors opening and closing with metallic jingles. Yet to me, everything felt distant, muffled, as though I were moving through water. The cafe Mrs. Miller had suggested was small, almost hidden between two larger storefronts. Its wooden sign hung slightly crooked, the paint faded from years of sun and rain. I pushed the door open, and a bell chimed softly above my head. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me like a blanket, though today it brought no comfort. Usually, the aroma of coffee reminded me of mornings in the bakery, of fresh pastries cooling on wire racks and customers chatting at the counter. But here, in this moment, it felt foreign. My sanctuary of scent had been stolen from me, twisted by the turmoil in my heart. I chose a seat in the far corner, away from the window, where shadows pooled and no one could easily see me. I didn't want to be recognized. The last thing I needed was a neighbor walking in, asking cheerful questions I couldn't bear to answer. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a man stepped inside. He wasn't the kind of figure you'd notice at first glance. Medium height, stocky build, dressed plainly in a light blue shirt tucked neatly into worn slacks. But when his eyes lifted to scan the room, I felt an immediate jolt. His gaze was steady, penetrating, as though he could see past the surface of things and into the places people tried hardest to hide. He walked directly toward me and, without introduction, slid into the chair across from mine. His voice was low, measured. "Mrs. Roberts?" I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. Instead, I slid a small flash drive across the table. My hands trembled as I whispered, "This is all I have." He didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he studied me, his expression unreadable, his silence stretching until I thought I might break. Then, slowly, he picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. "What's on it?" he asked, though not unkindly. My voice cracked as I listed them. A receipt, an email, a tube, napkins, photographs, proof, I think. I don't know, but I believe my husband is cheating on me. The words tasted bitter, like ash on my tongue. Saying them aloud made them real, in a way I hadn't fully allowed until that moment. Thomas nodded once, pulling out a small leather notebook. His hands were quick, methodical, jotting notes as if each detail were a puzzle piece sliding into place. His face remained impassive, but in his eyes, I caught a flicker of understanding. Not pity, never pity but recognition. He had seen this story before, played out in countless variations. "Mrs. Roberts," he said finally, his voice calm, almost reassuring. "I'll begin following your husband this afternoon. I'll be discreet. You'll know soon enough." The weight of his words hit me hard. Soon enough. That meant my suspicions would either be proven right or my paranoia would be revealed. I wasn't sure which outcome frightened me more. I blinked back tears, lowering my gaze to the scratched wooden table. "Thank you," I whispered, barely audible. I need to know the truth, whatever it, Island." Thomas gave a single nod, closing his notebook with a quiet snap. "Go home," he instructed gently. "Don't do anything that might raise suspicion. Let me handle the rest." I watched him leave, his figure blending into the crowd outside as though he were just another face in the city. Yet to me, he was now the fragile bridge between my collapsing world and the truth I dreaded but desperately needed. When the bell above the cafe door chimed shut again, I sat alone in the corner, staring at the cold dregs of my untouched coffee. My hands rested on the table, empty, but my heart carried the unbearable weight of betrayal and the terrifying anticipation of what was to come. That evening, I tried to lose myself in routine. At the bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar clung to my apron, ovens roared steadily, and trays of pastries lined the counters. Customers smiled. Children pressed their noses against the glass to choose their favorite treats. From the outside, life seemed unchanged, but inside me, nothing was the same. Every smile felt hollow, every laugh a sound from a distant world I no longer belonged to. When I returned home, the house was empty. Julian was still at his meeting. I forced myself to go through the motions, dinner alone, dishes washed, lights dimmed, but my mind never left that cafe table, that flash drive in Thomas's pocket. I told myself it could take days, maybe weeks. Private investigators weren't magicians. Still, my stomach knotted every time my phone buzzed, even if it was just a bakery supplier or a delivery confirmation. And then, near midnight, it happened. The vibration rattled against the wooden counter. My breath hitched when I saw the sender. Thomas. My thumb hovered over the screen before finally opening the message. There it was. A single photo. I tapped it, and the image filled my screen. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought I might faint. Julian, dressed in his familiar light blue shirt, stepping into a high-end restaurant downtown. His hand was not empty. It was clasped tightly with hers. And her was Allison, my daughter-in-law. My stomach turned violently, and I nearly dropped the phone. My own son's wife, Daniel's wife, walking hand in hand with the man I had shared my entire life with. I zoomed in, desperate for the photo to prove me wrong. But there was no mistaking her. The tight black dress, the heavy makeup, the red lipstick so vivid it bled against the dim restaurant lighting. Her hair fell in waves over her shoulders, styled in a way I had never seen at family dinners. They didn't look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law. No awkward distance, no careful avoidance. No, in that photo they looked like lovers. The kind of lovers who had rehearsed secrecy for so long that their bodies moved naturally toward each other, bound by a forbidden current. My hand shook so violently that the phone screen blurred. I sank into the kitchen chair, the wood groaning under me as though it too felt the weight of my world collapsing. For years at family gatherings, I had convinced myself that Allison's distance from Julian was indifference. She often sat far away, rarely speaking to him, her face turned politely but cold. I had even joked about it with Daniel, who once laughed and said, "Mom, Allison can't stand Dad. She avoids him like the plague." How blind I had been, how cruelly fooled. It had all been an act performed flawlessly under my very nose. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred with tears. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, another message arrived. Another photo. This one showed them seated inside, a candlelit table between them, flowers arranged delicately in the center. Allison leaned close to Julian, her lips curved in a smile too intimate, too warm. And Julian, my husband, my rock of 40 years, was gazing at her with tenderness I hadn't seen in decades. The kind of look he once reserved for me. A sob tore from my chest, raw and hollow, though I clamped my hand over my mouth to muffle it. I replayed those early memories like a punishment, the way he looked at me when we were young, when my hair was long and the world was still ours to conquer. That look of genuine adoration, that love I thought was mine forever, and now it belonged to her, my daughter-in-law. I felt the room tilt, the clock's ticking growing louder and louder until it drowned out every other sound. My world had ruptured, and this was only the beginning. I thought the photos had destroyed me. I thought nothing could pierce deeper than seeing Julian and Allison together, holding hands, their faces lit by the glow of a restaurant meant for lovers, not for a father-in-law and his son's wife. But then, close to 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Thomas. This time it wasn't a photo, it was a video file. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands trembled above the screen, slick with sweat. My heart thundered so loudly I feared it might wake the neighbors. Somewhere deep inside, I begged myself to stop, to delete the message, to look away, to preserve what was left of the illusion I had lived in for 40 years. But I pressed play. The footage was grainy, taken from a discreet distance, but clear enough. The restaurant's warm amber lights reflected in the windows, casting Allison's profile in sharp relief. She leaned forward, her hair cascading over one shoulder, whispering something into Julian's ear. He laughed. Not the tired chuckle he gave me at home, not the forced sighs he offered at family dinners. No, this was loud, unguarded, almost boyish. A laugh I hadn't heard from him in decades. The sound stabbed through me. It wasn't just laughter, it was joy, and it wasn't mine. Allison's eyes sparkled, her smile wide and full of mischief, her hand resting lightly on his. Julian, my husband, looked at her with a softness that hollowed me out completely. A gaze of tenderness, of devotion. A gaze I once thought belonged only to me. They stood to leave, and my heart pounded in my ears. Julian walked around the table with ease, with grace, opening the door for her like a gentleman escorting his beloved. She slipped her arm into his, as naturally as if it had always belonged there. Together, they stepped into the night, their figures close, their shadows merging into one. I replayed the video. Once, twice, again. Each viewing tore me apart, but I couldn't stop. It was as though I needed to carve the truth into my soul so deeply that there would be no room for denial. Every time I pressed play, it was another knife, another scar, another confirmation that the life I thought I had was already gone. Tears blurred the screen until I could barely see, but I kept watching. My chest tightened, a raw, physical ache that spread into my arms, my throat, my very bones. And through it all, one thought kept pounding like a drumbeat. Allison. Allison, the woman I had welcomed into my home, the young woman I had taught to make our family's traditional flan, whose wedding veil I had adjusted with my own hands, whose tears I had comforted when she first moved into our neighborhood. I had treated her like a daughter. And Julian had been the man I trusted above all others. Together, they had gutted me with betrayal, so grotesque it felt surreal. I saved the video to the flash drive with shaking hands, cataloging it with the others' evidence of a reality too cruel to face, yet too dangerous to ignore. When I finally set the phone down, I sat in the bakery office, surrounded by the familiar scent of flour and sugar. The contrast nearly broke me. The sweet aroma that had always meant safety, home, and pride now felt tainted, mocking. The oven ticked as it cooled, each metallic pop sounding like a cruel echo of the clock at home, reminding me that time would not stop, even if my world already had. I buried my face in my hands and whispered into the emptiness, "God help me. What do I do now?" But no answer came. Only the silence of the night, heavy and merciless. Morning came, but it brought no relief. My body moved through the bakery like a ghost. I kneaded dough, signed delivery invoices, smiled at customers who praised my pastries, but none of it touched me. Inside, I was hollow, emptied out by what I had seen the night before. Every time I blinked, Julian's laughter with Allison replayed in my head, cruel and vivid. By mid-morning, as the smell of vanilla and butter filled the shop, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. My heart seized. I wiped flour from my hands before daring to look. Another message from Thomas. The words were short, almost clinical. "More evidence, Mrs. Roberts." Attached were several images. I tapped them open, and the world tilted. The first photo showed Julian leaving a law office downtown. His posture was casual, confident, as though he had nothing to hide. Walking beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, was Allison. She wore a beige office dress, her hair pulled into a high ponytail, oversized sunglasses covering most of her face. But I knew it was her. I would know her silhouette anywhere. I zoomed in, searching for some shred of innocence, something I could twist into a lie to comfort myself. But there was nothing innocent here. They weren't father-in-law and daughter-in-law stepping out of an office. They were too close, their bodies angled toward each other with an intimacy that screamed the truth. The next image froze my blood. A hotel entrance, gleaming glass doors, a golden sign reflecting the afternoon Sunday, and there they were, Julian and Allison standing before it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Julian's hand hovered at her back, guiding her inside, while Allison tilted her head toward him in a gesture of ease, of familiarity. I clutched the counter, the weight of the photo nearly buckling my knees. Then came a video. I hesitated, already broken by the last one, but I pressed play anyway, because I needed the truth etched into me beyond denial. The shot was from a distance, shaky but clear enough. A third-floor balcony. Julian stood there with Allison, his arm around her waist. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hair swaying gently in the breeze. And then, like a knife driven straight into my chest, they kissed. It was brief, almost shy, but devastating in its simplicity. A kiss stripped of pretense, careless of who might see. The kiss of two people who had crossed lines they could never uncross. My breath left me in a ragged sob. I replayed the clip frame by frame, punishing myself with every second. His hand stroking her hair, her smile breaking into laughter. The way his eyes softened. The way his body leaned into hers as if she belonged there. It was the tenderness that destroyed me most. 30 years ago, under a San Diego sky, he had touched my hair like that, had whispered promises of forever as we planned a future together. I had believed him. I had built my life around him. And now I watched him give that same tenderness to my son's wife, as though my love had been nothing more than a rehearsal for hers. The bakery's warm scents turned bitter in my nostrils. Customers' voices faded into meaningless noise. All I could see was that balcony, those two figures locked in a betrayal so cruel, it felt like the ground itself was splitting beneath me. I saved the video to the flash drive, my hands moving mechanically while my soul crumbled. There was no going back now. That night, I could hardly keep my hands steady as I closed the bakery. The ovens cooled with faint metallic pops, the cash register clicked shut, and the lights dimmed one by one. Yet all of it felt meaningless. The day's work, the smiling faces of customers, the little bell at the door, all of it blurred against the storm swirling in my chest. When I finally returned home, the house seemed colder than ever. Julian was already in bed, his snores filling the silence, steady and oblivious. I sat in the kitchen, clutching a cup of water I didn't drink, staring at the pale glow of my phone. Near midnight, it buzzed. My pulse spiked when I saw Thomas's name. I answered immediately, pressing the phone tight to my ear. His voice was low, hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Mrs. Roberts? I managed to capture an audio recording in the hotel parking lot. They didn't notice a thing. I'm sending it to you now." I swallowed hard, my throat constricted. "Thank you, Thomas," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "Send it." A moment later, the file arrived. I slipped my headphones on, my hands clammy, and pressed play. At first, only the faint hum of cars in the distance. Then, voices. Allison's voice, unmistakable, but colder than I had ever known it. Gone was the polite tone she used at family dinners, the sweet laugh she once offered Daniel. This voice was sharp, ambitious, dripping with disdain. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want the whole bakery chain under my name already. That old hag doesn't deserve it." I froze, my blood turning to ice. Old hag, that's what she called me. Me, the woman who had taught her recipes, who had treated her like a daughter. Before the sting of those words could settle, Julian's voice followed. Deep, calm, confident, too confident. "Don't worry. Juliet doesn't know anything. She trusts me too much. Leave it to me, I'll handle the papers. She won't suspect a thing." It was like a knife twisting into my chest. My husband wasn't just betraying me with another woman. He wasn't just humiliating me with Allison. Together, they were planning to steal everything I had built with my own hands, my bakery, my livelihood, my life's work. Every memory of kneading dough until my arms ached, of waking before dawn to light ovens, of delivering pastries to hotels with sweat running down my back, all of it, they wanted to erase, to sign away with a pen stroke, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in their way. I pressed pause, unable to breathe. My reflection in the kitchen window was pale, almost ghostly. My lips parted in shock. The words echoed in my ears. "Juliet trusts me too much." The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just love he had given away. It was my dignity, my labor, my home, everything. I forced myself to copy the audio to the flash drive where the photos and videos were already stored, cataloging each piece of evidence like a soldier preparing for war. My handwriting shook as I jotted the date, time, and location in a small notebook, desperate to impose order on the chaos consuming me. When the recording ended, silence filled the kitchen once more. Only the ticking of the old wall clock reminded me that time was still moving forward. I sat there, my hands gripping the edges of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. For 40 years, I had believed Julian was my partner, my anchor. Now I knew he was my executioner, and Allison, my son's wife, was his accomplice. The hours after hearing that recording blurred together in a haze of shock and fury. I moved through the house like a shadow. Every sound amplified the creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the steady tick of the clock that seemed to mock me with its persistence. Sleep was impossible. My body trembled with exhaustion, yet my mind blazed with clarity. I had all the evidence I needed: the photos, the videos, the audio files. They were enough to expose Julian and Allison to Daniel, to the neighborhood, even to the world if I chose. But raw evidence wasn't enough. They had taken my love, my dignity, my bakery. They had reduced me to the old hag number. They would not walk away untouched. As dawn's pale light crept through the curtains, an idea began to form. Not just an idea, a plan. Revenge had been simmering inside me ever since I found that tube in the glove compartment. Now it demanded form, structure, action. I began with small steps. From the drawer in the bedroom, I retrieved Daniel's old voice recorder, the one I had bought him when he first went to college so he could tape lectures. It was still functional, though the battery was weak. I replaced it, tested the red light, and listened to the faint hiss of the microphone springing to life. Perfect. I would use it to capture whatever Julian and Allison whispered when they believed I was gone. I scouted the bedroom carefully, moving slowly so as not to disturb the snoring beast in the bed. Behind the bookshelf, next to the headboard, I found the perfect spot. I concealed the recorder there, draping the cord under a family photograph Daniel and Allison on their wedding day, with Julian's arm around my shoulder. My throat tightened at the bitter irony. That photograph, once a symbol of family, now served as camouflage for their betrayal. But a recorder alone wasn't enough. I needed something more dramatic, something that would not only reveal their sins, but mark them with humiliation so deep they could never recover. The memory of the lubricant tube in Julian's car returned to me. How easily I had switched its contents for industrial superglue that had been the first spark. Now, the flames of my plan would spread further. In the kitchen, I set up a trap. A skillet half filled with oil on the stove, a thin cord tied to the igniter, its other end threaded discreetly toward the window. One pull from a safe distance would ignite the oil, sending thick black smoke billowing out enough to alarm the neighbors, enough to summon the fire department, enough to create chaos. And in that chaos, Julian and Allison would be caught. I tested the mechanism once, just briefly, watching as smoke curled upward in dark spirals before quickly dousing the flame. It worked flawlessly. My heart pounded as though I had just committed a crime, but the adrenaline steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt in control. I rehearsed every step in my mind. Pretend to leave town. Slip across the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. Wait and watch. The recorder would capture their voices. The smoke would draw the neighbors and the firemen, and the trap I had set with the glue would hold them fast in their own shame. As I wiped my hands with lemon soap, scrubbing away the faint trace of oil, I caught sight of myself in the window. My face looked harder, older, but my eyes burned with a determination I had never known. I was no longer the passive wife of 40 years. I was something else now. Julian, I whispered to my reflection, my voice cold and steady. You wanted me blind, but I see everything. The plan was set. All that remained was to wait for the right moment to strike. That evening, the house felt like a stage awaiting its performance. Every object, every chair, every curtain, every shadow seemed complicit in what was about to unfold. My body moved calmly, almost mechanically, but inside me, nerves twisted tight like piano strings on the verge of snapping. Julian came home late, muttering excuses in that tired, rehearsed tone of his. He kissed my shoulder as he passed, the same hollow gesture as always, and sat down to eat. I watched him closely, memorizing every detail. The way his eyes darted away from mine, the false weariness in his sigh, the faint trace of that same floral perfume clinging stubbornly to his shirt. He had no idea the trap was already set. Over dinner, I forced myself to play my part. I smiled faintly, set his plate in front of him, poured his wine with steady hands. Then, when the moment was right, I spoke in a voice deliberately casual. Julian, I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow. A new partner wants to sign a contract. I'll probably be home late. Can you take care of dinner? For a heartbeat, I saw something flash in his eyes. Not worry, not concern, but relief. His lips curved in a small, almost hidden smile as he reached for my hand. A big contract? He asked with mock tenderness. Don't worry, go ahead, I'll take care of things here. The spark of triumph in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. He believed me. He wanted me gone. Later that night, I pretended to be tired. I let out a practiced yawn, patted his shoulder, and whispered, "I'll turn in early. I have to wake up before dawn to catch the bus." He nodded, too distracted to notice the tension in my voice. His focus was elsewhere on the opportunity my absence would give him. But I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open in the dark, every muscle rigid. Around midnight, his snoring stopped. I heard him rise, moving softly across the room. A faint light flickered as he picked up his phone. I slowed my breathing, feigning deep sleep, while my heart raced violently. Through the crack in my eyelids, I saw him standing near the living room window, his voice hushed but clear. "Yes, of course. Come tomorrow. We won't need the hotel anymore. Juliet has to leave town. She'll be gone all day." Then came a laugh light, sweet, unmistakable. Allison's voice drifted faintly from the other end of the call. "That's perfect, Dad. Finally, we can be comfortable." I gripped the blankets so tightly that my knuckles burned. Rage coursed through me, hot and steady. They weren't just betraying me. They were preparing to defile my home, my marriage bed, the very walls I had built with my own hands. When Julian returned to bed, I kept my body still, my breathing even. He snored again within minutes, blissfully unaware. I slipped quietly from beneath the sheets, my bare feet silent against the floorboards. From the drawer, I retrieved Daniel's old recorder, its red light glowing faintly like an accomplice in the darkness. I checked the battery again, then hid it behind the bookshelf in the bedroom, its tiny microphone angled perfectly to capture every sound. I covered the cord with the framed photo of Daniel and Allison's wedding, the irony biting into me like glass. I stood for a long moment, staring at that photograph. Allison in white, Daniel smiling proudly, Julian's hand heavy on my shoulder. A perfect picture of a perfect family. A lie. When the recorder was secure, I returned to the kitchen. The skillet of oil sat waiting on the stove, the thin cord tied neatly to the igniter, its other end looped to the heavy coffee can by the window. I tested it once more, watching a brief curl of smoke rise before extinguishing it. Perfect. The trap was ready. By the time dawn began to brush pale light across the curtains, everything was in place. I shook Julian gently, my voice calm, controlled. "I have to go now. The bus leaves early. Don't wait for me tonight." Half asleep, he mumbled, "All right, be careful, Juliet," and buried his face back into the pillow. I turned away, my heart hammering in my chest. Instead of heading to the bus station, I walked across the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She opened the door in her robe, surprise etched on her face when she saw my purse slung over my shoulder. "Juliet? What's wrong?" she whispered. I forced a smile, though my voice wavered. "Mrs. Peterson, may I stay here for a while? I need to watch my house." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press. She poured me a hot cup of coffee and guided me to a chair by the window. From there, I could see my own front door, the stage, where the truth would finally reveal itself. From Mrs. Peterson's window, I watched the minutes crawl by. My hands clutched the warm coffee cup she had given me, but the heat did nothing to calm the icy current running through my veins. The street was quiet, bathed in the gentle light of mid-morning, neighbors tending to their gardens, the occasional car humming past. No one suspected that in just a little while, the calm would fracture into chaos. At around 10 o'clock, a taxi slowed in front of my house. My chest tightened. The rear door opened, and Allison stepped out. She wore a light floral dress, the fabric swaying in the breeze, and large sunglasses that covered half her face. She looked around quickly, nervously, before Julian opened the front door and ushered her inside. He glanced up and down the street once, the way a thief checks for witnesses, then pulled her into the house with hurried hands. I gripped my cup so tightly I thought the porcelain might crack. My heart pounded in my throat, but outwardly I remained still. "It's time," I whispered under my breath, though Mrs. Peterson, sitting nearby, looked at me curiously. I pulled out my phone, opened the app connected to the hidden recorder in the bedroom, and slipped my headphones over my ears. The sounds came immediately. Allison's laughter, high, flirtatious, cruelly familiar, the clinking of glasses, heavy footsteps across the wooden floor. Then Julian's deep voice, thick with desire and arrogance. "All right, we don't have to hide in hotels anymore. She's gone." Allison's voice followed, mocking, venomous. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is out of the way." I clenched my jaw so tightly it ached. Old hag. Again, their contempt burned hotter than fire. Then came the sound I dreaded, the creak of the bed springs, rhythmic and undeniable. I closed my eyes, bile rising in my throat, and forced myself to breathe. My fingers hovered over the cord tied to the stove's igniter. Just a little longer, just long enough to let them seal their own guilt. Suddenly, Allison's voice broke into a sharp cry. "What the hell? We're stuck!" Julian's growl followed, panicked but furious. "Shut up! Wait, let me see!" That was my cue. With one sharp pull on the cord, I triggered the trap. In the kitchen across the street, the skillet of oil ignited, flames licking upward before settling into a thick, black smoke that billowed out of the open window. The smoke curled into the sky like a signal fire, dark and heavy, spreading quickly. From outside I heard shouts. "Fire! Juliet's house is on fire!" Neighbors rushed out of their homes, pointing at the rising smoke, panic rippling through the street. "Mrs." Peterson gasped, gripping my arm. "Juliet, your house!" "I know," I whispered, feigning shock, though inside, a cold calm spread through me. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had planned. The noise in my headphones grew frantic. Allison's voice, shrill with terror. "Julian, do something! I can't move!" Julian's voice, desperate now, the confidence stripped away. "Don't scream. Just hold still, damn it!" I closed my eyes and let the sounds wash over me. Their humiliation, their panic, their helplessness. It was the justice I had promised myself on the night I first discovered the truth. The smoke thickened. Neighbors were already dialing the fire department, their shouts echoing down the block, from where I sat, hidden in Mrs. Peterson's parlor. I sipped my coffee with steady hands and fixed my gaze on the scene. The trap had sprung, and soon there would be no turning back. The smoke thickened quickly, curling into the sky in heavy black plumes. From Mrs. Peterson's window, I could see neighbors rushing into their yards, their faces etched with panic. Some shouted to each other. Others pointed toward my house as though the flames themselves might burst through the windows at any second. "Call the fire department," a man yelled, his voice cracking with urgency. Phones appeared in trembling hands, and within moments, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. My heart thudded against my ribs as the sound grew louder, sharper, until the red fire truck turned onto our street. The vehicle barreled forward, brakes screeching, and came to a halt in front of my house. The sight of it so powerful, so official, sent a sharp pang through me because I knew who would be leading them. Daniel. My son leapt from the driver's seat in full gear, his helmet shining under the midday sunday. His face was focused, stern, already barking orders to his team. "Get the hoses ready. There may be people trapped inside." His voice rang out with authority, but to me, it carried something heavier. Pride, love, the sense of responsibility he had inherited as both a firefighter and as my child. A lump rose in my throat. My son, always the protector, always so proud of his family, of his parents. And now he was about to face the ugliest truth imaginable. I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him, to whisper an apology for what he was about to discover, but I forced myself to remain where I was, hidden behind Mrs. Peterson's curtain, watching as the plan unfolded. My heart ached, but my resolve did not waver. Through my headphones, chaos erupted. Julian's voice thundered, raw with panic. "Allison, stop screaming! Just damn it, hold still. We'll figure this out." Allison sobbed, her voice sharp with terror. "I can't move, Julian. It hurts. Oh God, it burns." The bed creaked violently, their movements frantic, but I knew it was useless. The superglue had already sealed their fate. They were trapped in their own sin, bound together by the very evidence of their betrayal. Daniel and his team charged through the front door with axes and hoses, the splintering crack of wood echoing down the street. Neighbors gasped, children cried. People held each other's hands tightly, as though witnessing the end of the world. The smoke from the skillet continued to billow, not dangerous enough to consume the house, but thick enough to convince anyone that a blaze raged inside. Perfect, exactly as I had planned. In my headphones, the moment of reckoning arrived. The bedroom door burst open, boots clattering against the hardwood. Daniel's voice faltered mid-command, trembling with confusion and horror. What is this?" Behind him, another firefighter muttered under his breath, "Oh my God." A nervous laugh escaped a third, quickly stifled by Daniel's bark. Silence. His voice cracked, not just with authority, but with anguish. I closed my eyes, picturing it. My son standing there, staring at the unbearable sight of his father and his wife, tangled together in shame, glued to the bed, their faces twisted in pain and fear. My son's world shattering in the very house he had grown up in. Outside, the neighborhood swelled with whispers. People leaned against fences, hands covering mouths in shock. "What's happening?" someone asked. Another voice rose above the crowd, trembling but sure. "It's Julian and Allison. Together." Gasps rippled like a wave. The judgment of the entire community, sharp and merciless, had begun. And I, from the safety of Mrs. Peterson's parlor, sat in silence with my coffee cooling between my palms, knowing that the truth was no longer mine alone to bear. Through my headphones, I could hear the raw confusion and disgust of the fire crew echoing in my bedroom. Julian's voice cracked with rage and desperation, muffled by sobs. "Daniel, get everyone out, close the door, don't let them see us." But it was far too late. The scene inside my home had already spilled outward. Firefighters whispered among themselves, their voices low but unable to mask their disbelief. Some tried to stifle nervous laughter, others cursed under their breath. And outside, the neighbors pressed closer, their curiosity transforming into collective judgment. From Mrs. Peterson's window, I watched the crowd gather. Mothers with children tugging at their skirts, old men leaning on canes, teenagers filming with their phones despite being shooed away. Whispers turned into shouts, sharp and cutting. "Unbelievable!" one woman gasped, her hand clamped over her mouth. "Father-in-law and daughter-in-law," another hissed. "What filth!" "Poor Juliet," someone else murmured, shaking their head. The weight of their disdain filled the air, heavy and merciless. Then the door burst open, and I saw them, wrapped awkwardly in thin hospital sheets hastily draped by embarrassed firefighters. Julian and Allison were carried out on stretchers. Their faces were pale, contorted with pain and humiliation. Allison's sobs rang out, piercing and frantic. "Please, please, do something, it hurts!" Her hands clawed at the sheets, as though she could cover herself from the dozens of eyes burning into her. Julian's face was a mask of fury and shame, his jaw clenched, his voice hoarse as he muttered, "Don't let anyone see us. For God's sake, don't let them see." But everyone was already seeing. Phones flashed. Gasps and cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. "What a disgrace," someone shouted, their voice thick with contempt. "How could they do this to Daniel, to Juliet?" Mrs. Peterson stood beside me, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. Slowly, she raised her own phone and began recording, her eyes meeting mine for a brief second. In them, I saw pity. Yes, but also a quiet, righteous anger on my behalf. The firefighters, reluctant but professional, carried Julian and Allison through the gauntlet of eyes and whispers. The sheet slipped slightly, exposing too much, and a wave of shocked exclamations rose from the crowd. I felt my chest tighten not with pity, but with a grim satisfaction. They had planned to humiliate me, to strip me of everything I had built. Instead, it was they who were stripped bare, their shame laid open for the world to witness. Daniel walked out last. His steps were heavy, his helmet tucked under his arm, his face ashen. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at me across the street, didn't even look at his father or his wife. His eyes were empty, hollow, as though the man he had been that morning had died in that bedroom. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the siren wailed, and the vehicle pulled away, carrying their disgrace with it. But the whispers remained, spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Juliet's husband, with her daughter-in-law, 40 years of marriage ruined. God help Daniel. I stayed hidden behind the curtain, my coffee long gone cold in my hands, my heart torn between grief and vindication. My plan had worked. They were exposed. But as I watched my son stand frozen in the yard, his shoulders heavy with betrayal, I realized the cost of my revenge was heavier than I had ever imagined. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, unforgiving glow on every weary face that passed. I sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair on the 3rd floor, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. Mrs. Peterson sat beside me, silent, her presence steady but heavy, with unspoken questions. Hours trickled by. Every so often, nurses hurried past, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, their voices hushed as though trying to conceal the weight of scandal carried into these sterile halls. People had already started whispering the couple from the neighborhood, the fire rescue, father-in-law and daughter-in-law. Their disgrace was spreading like wildfire, unstoppable. At last, a doctor emerged from behind the swinging doors. Sweat glistened on his brow, his expression tired but composed. He approached slowly, and I rose to meet him, my legs trembling though my voice remained steady. "Mrs. Roberts?" he asked gently. I nodded. "We managed to separate them," he said, clearing his throat. "Fortunately, there's no permanent damage. They'll need ointment for the skin, but they'll recover physically." Physically. The word rang in my ears. As if that mattered anymore. Their bodies could heal, but their shame, their betrayal, would remain carved into them forever. I pressed my lips together, feigning relief, and whispered, "Thank you, doctor." A nurse appeared, young and soft-eyed, handing me 2 tubes of ointment. Her voice carried pity. "Ma'am, I know this must be hard for you. Please, take these to them. They're in room 312. I gave a weak smile, masking the storm inside me. "Of course. Thank you." The nurse turned, and in that brief moment, my hands moved swiftly, with a confidence born from rage and precision. From my purse, I pulled out the 2 tubes of mustard I had prepared earlier, identical in size and shape. In one smooth motion, I swapped them for the real ointment, sliding the medicine deep into my bag as though it were contraband. My palms no longer trembled. My movements felt inevitable, rehearsed, as though fate itself guided me. I walked into room 312. The sight before me was almost unbearable. Allison lay in the bed to the left, her hair a tangled mess, mascara streaked down her face. Her eyes, red and swollen, darted away from mine, unable to meet the gaze of the woman she had betrayed. Julian was on the right, his face ashen, his jaw tight with shame. His hands twitched as if he wanted to reach for me, but the weight of what he had done kept him frozen. "Juliet," he croaked, his voice weak, cracked. "I can explain." I placed the tubes of mustard on the small bedside table with a calmness that startled even me. "The doctor said you'd need these," I interrupted, my tone clipped and final. Allison whimpered, her hands trembling as she reached for one. Julian's eyes searched mine desperately, but I gave him nothing. No pity, no forgiveness, only a cold, steady silence. I turned and walked out before either of them could say another word. Minutes later, the hallway erupted with screams. Allison's shrill cry pierced the sterile air. "It burns! My skin, it burns!" Julian's voice followed, raw with pain and rage. "What the hell is this? Who did this?" The commotion drew nurses, doctors, even patients from their rooms. Murmurs spread instantly. "It's them, the scandalous too. Even in the hospital, trouble follows them." I stood at the end of the corridor, watching as people craned their necks, their whispers sharpening like knives. "That's them, isn't it? The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law? Shameless? They deserve every bit of it." The doctor rushed past me, frantic, barking orders to flush their skin and neutralize the burn. But the damage, humiliation, disgrace was already done. Mrs. Peterson, standing beside me, placed a hand lightly on my arm. Her eyes flicked toward the chaos, then back to me. She didn't ask. She didn't accuse. She simply squeezed, as if to say, they got what they deserved. And I, standing there in that bright, merciless hallway, felt no guilt, only the faint, bitter satisfaction of justice served in silence. The hospital room quieted only after the nurses had flushed their skin and soothed the burning with neutralizing cream. Still, muffled sobs and groans leaked into the corridor. The stench of mustard clung stubbornly to the air, mingling with antiseptic until it became unbearable. I stood by the window at the far end of the hallway, my purse heavy on my shoulder, my body rigid. I had waited long enough. At last, Daniel appeared. His firefighter's jacket was gone, replaced with a plain shirt, but his eyes were hollow, dark pools that refused to meet mine at first. In his hand, he carried a thick manila folder. He placed it in my hands silently, his expression carved from stone. Inside were the documents I had prepared days ago, my careful insurance against Julian's treachery, divorce papers. Alongside them lay the envelope filled with evidence, the photos, the videos, the recordings, every poisonous truth I had collected. Proof undeniable, laid out like weapons. I held the folder against my chest and walked slowly to room 312. My heels clicked against the sterile floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat of finality. When I entered, both Julian and Allison turned toward me. Julian's face was pale, his voice trembling. "Juliet, please let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I laid the folder on the bedside table, my fingers steady though my heart pounded in my ears. 40 years of marriage, I said coldly. End here. Sign the papers. After that, you can rot in hell for all I care. Allison's sobs grew frantic. She reached toward me, her voice cracking with desperation. "Honey, forgive me. I made a mistake. Please, Daniel, please don't leave me." Her words stabbed through the air, but Daniel did not respond. He stood behind me, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't even flinch when she begged. The silence from my son was more brutal than any shout could have been. Julian tried again, his voice rising with desperation. "Juliet, don't do this. I didn't want any of this. I was weak, I was foolish. Please listen to me." I jerked my hand away when he reached for me, my voice sharp as a blade. "Don't say another word. You chose your path. You betrayed me, betrayed our son, betrayed this entire family. There's nothing left to hear." His eyes widened, his lips trembled, but no words came. He sank back against the pillows, defeated. Allison collapsed into her sheets, her body shaking with sobs. "Daniel, please," she wailed, reaching toward him with trembling hands. "I love you. I only wanted—" But Daniel turned silently and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy, his shoulders stiff. He didn't look back. The nurse entered then, frowning. "Please, keep your voices down. This is a hospital." I gave her a curt nod and turned to leave. Behind me, Julian's voice broke into a desperate cry. "Juliet, please." But I didn't stop. Out in the corridor, I found Daniel leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. I walked to him slowly, my heart aching. "Mom," he whispered, his voice fractured. "Why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" I couldn't answer. I simply wrapped my arms around him, holding him as tightly as I could. His body trembled against mine, the weight of betrayal crushing us both. In that embrace, I knew one truth above all. Julian and Allison had lost everything, their dignity, their marriage, their elaborate scheme. But Daniel and I had lost something far greater, a family